In this video I will show you my way of playing the old Benoni, and we are gonna take a look at the Benoni Gambit accepted, which happens after the moves d4, c5, and then white captures the pawn here on c5. And in these lines, the best thing you can do as black, in my opinion, is to play e6, because this develops your bishop, and we are already threatening to recapture the pawn and also activate our bishop along this diagonal. And the most popular response here from white is actually not that good, and the most popular response from white is trying to hold on to this pawn. But it's basically impossible to hold on to this pawn advantage as white, and we are going to try and punish this. So if white plays this, we are going to play the move a5. And with a5 we are trying to threaten to take here, and then after we take this pawn on b4, we will also be able to capture back here on c5. And here, 60% of games, so the most played move is a gigantic blunder, and that is the move pawn to c3. And white's idea is to defend this, but of course this doesn't work because of takes, and then the queen goes to f6, attacking the rook, and this rook in the corner is lost. The only way to defend it is maybe to go knight c3 and then play the bishop here, but of course white had to sacrifice a knight in these lines, and black can even just go back here to f6. So immediately here from the start, if white tries to defend this with the move c3, they are immediately losing, and this is the most played variation. There are some other options white could try. Probably bishop d2 is the most decent alternative, but even this is losing for white. With bishop d2, basically white's plan is to recapture here with the bishop and then also get an extra defender on this pawn without running into any more troubles. Because right now, of course, queen f6, well, it doesn't really work because of bishop c3 and everything is just defended. But in this variation, black also has a nice move, which is knight to a6. And knight to a6 both attacks the bishop and also threatens to recapture the pawn. And you will see, once the knight reaches this square on c5, it can actually not be attacked by any of these enemy pawns. So we will just have a really strong and centralized knight here. Also, this is winning a tempo on the bishop, since the bishop has to move. There are a couple of things white can do. Of course, if they do move the bishop, they are just gonna lose the pawn, so that doesn't really matter. If they go here with the bishop, which is not so good, we could actually just recapture here on c5 as well. So this line doesn't really work. And then if white plays the move c3, which is the most played variation, it's important that you don't just capture here, because otherwise white will be able to capture and get this, and queen f6 doesn't work because the knight here, and then of course this is now defended. So the thing you can do here in this variation, after they play c3, is to capture here on c5 with the bishop. And again, we are threatening here to just simply win material. So most likely white is going to exchange, and you will get this position where you have a knight on c5, and this knight cannot be kicked away because these pawns are already missing. And then of course we just have simple developing moves, knight f6, castling, queen c7 in many lines, sometimes b6, bishop b7, putting some pressure on this long diagonal. Also, sometimes white could try to play with pawn to a3, but that is a devastating blunder as well, because of knight takes here, and if white takes here, you can capture this rook for free. And if white takes here, there's also another beautiful trick with bishop takes f2 check, king takes, queen f6, and then you can also pick up the rook in the corner. So in general, if your opponents play b3, b4 to try and protect this pawn and keep their advantage, they will run into a lot of problems. Sometimes you could also see this variation here where they try to defend it with bishop e3, and this looks really awkward for white. This bishop is already blocking their e-pawn, but this is a possible way of defending. Again, you can just play knight a6, threatening to recapture, knight f3, you can recapture here, for example takes, and then we get this kind of position, e3, queen c7, bishop d3, knight f6, castles, and this is a good position. I'm gonna say this is about equal, so really if white wants to play this, they always can, but it's a little bit weird to block in your own pawns. I don't think you will get this, but I wanted to show you that yes, this is a possibility, and you will most likely just get a variation like this, which is very similar to all of the main lines we are going to take a look at in this video. The next thing I want to take a look at is what if white plays e4. So e4 is one of the top, it's actually the top engine move, but it isn't played that much online. It's played only 12% of games. A little bit more popular are moves like knight to f3 and also knight to c3, which we are going to take a look at as well. But but pawn to e4 is still played, and against this, of course, we can recapture, activating our bishop, targeting this weakness here on f2. Knight f3, for example, knight c6, bishop d3. Also possible in many of these lines is bishop c4, but that's always just a little bit worse. For example, in these lines, you will see we will just get a b5 push, and we are just going to win some time on the bishop. Most players will go to d3 anyways, but c4 is just a little bit worse for white. Bishop here, and as black you don't really need to know much theory, you can just develop. That is the really lovely thing about this opening. You don't need to know a lot of theory, you can just develop your pieces naturally. And here you can always play queen c7. Of course, you can also do many other things. You can castle, you can play d5, you can play d6. But I like to go for the most aggressive lines, and that is with the immediately developing the queen here to c7. If white ever has this knight developed, of course, you don't want to go to c7, because you could get kicked away. For example, in these lines, queen c7 is playable, but it's always a little bit annoying if they attack you. So I would always recommend, if they develop the knight, just play a6, and now these squares are gone and the knight cannot attack your queen, and now we can still castle on the next move. And here there are a couple of different variations. Some variations you have beautiful tactics and traps, but I wanted to mainly take a look at the most played variation here, and that is bishop g5. Other than that, sometimes you will also get rook e1, but rook e1 is a little bit strange because you can play knight g4, and the best move is to go back with the rook. So that's sometimes played, but they will just have to go back most likely. And bishop g5 is a really common move here. And here you will see a big advantage of why we have not castled yet. And that is that we are not going to castle on the king side. We are going to play b5. And we will allow white to capture this and to double our pawns. And we are either going to castle on the queen side, or we could even put our king here on e7. And many players with white will go for this, damaging your structure, because they know you cannot castle here, of course, because you would be in a lot of danger. And also castling queen side is already a little bit iffy, since all of these holes have already been created. But the idea is here that we're going to attack the enemy king with our rooks, sometimes with the rook on the g file, on the h file. We're going to push this pawn as well, and we are going to create a massive kingside attack. And there are two main ways for white to deal with this position. That is to either play a4, which I think is the most aggressive, because white is basically saying you cannot castle kingside. I will make sure you can also not castle on the queen side, so I will try to destroy this position. The other option that white has is to play a3 and then go for this move b4. So we're going to take a look at both. I'm going to look at a3 first, and I think a3 is also the most played variation, but I feel like a4 is a little bit better for white. So a3, we're just going to do normal development. The bishop is always going to go on this diagonal, b4, and you can just draw back with the bishop, no problem. And you can already see we have these two nice diagonals aiming at the king. If we can remove this pawn at any point, white is going to be devastating lost. I'm going to play some of the best moves for white. For example, knight e2. We're going to play knight into the center. Again, you can castle here, but there's no reason to castle. You can often even play king here to e7 as well. We can just develop the knight, and you want to get as many pieces as you can towards this enemy king position. If they take, you can recapture with the queen, and now we have three open diagonals to the enemy king. So this is already starting to look a little bit scary from the white side. If they ever attack you with a4, that doesn't matter, and here we can tuck away the king in the center with king e7, and that is why I didn't want to castle in this variation, because otherwise your king might have been in the open here on the c file in the future, or might have been in trouble if white ever activates pieces down this file. So we're going to put the king in the center. Black can take, we can recapture, and if white really wants, they can always capture here, and then we will capture with the rook. But this doesn't really stop our attack. We still have these two bishops eyeing down this enemy kingside position. We also recaptured here with the rook, because if you capture with the bishop and these lines, you are running into this, and sometimes you can get a queen trade and you don't really want to trade queens. You want to be as aggressive as possible. For example, knight here, and then there are multiple options. You can always keep going for the kingside attack, but in these positions you can even just destroy white on the queen side, and white is already pretty much lost in this position, because this pawn is really hard to defend. This pawn is attacked twice, so that is why white played knight g3. And if you look at this from the white side, this is under attack and this is under attack twice. So your knight is stuck defending, your bishop is stuck defending, this pawn is weak. Playing c3 doesn't help because we can capture it with the queen. And what are you going to do? Are you going to play a move like queen here to defend? I mean, this doesn't really look convincing from white, and white is going to lose material in many lines. There are multiple options here for black, for example queen c3, trying to win this pawn after all, and black is just winning in every line. That's why I think the most aggressive approach from white is probably to immediately attack us with a4 here in this position. And if they do this, you can just push pawn to b4, and this solves a lot of your problems, because first of all you get a tempo against the knight, and then now there's not really an attack from white on this side of the board. Pushing this doesn't help them. And they can also try to attack this, but it's a little bit slow and it's already defended twice. So that's why I like to counter with b4 after a4. We can just develop the bishop, for example rook here, and again we are not going to castle, we're just going to tuck away the king. There are some lines where you can castle, but most likely you're just going to tuck away the king in the center. Queen to d2, and then rook here to g8. And this is a beautiful demonstration of this kingside attack here from black. So we have two rooks aiming at the enemy king position, and this is a common theme in these kinds of positions. And our next plan is basically just to keep pushing this h-pawn until we can create a weakness that will allow us to go for a checkmate. So for example, white counters with c3, which is a common plan. They are trying to attack us on the queen side. We can capture, and then h4. And you can see our attack is already starting here. For example, rook e1, h4. So h5, h4, we're going to attack. And if white plays this move h3 to try and stop our attack, we even have queen g3. And this is a really beautiful move, because queen g3, we are threatening to basically checkmate here on g2 on the next move. And there's pretty much nothing white can do in this position. The queen cannot be captured, of course, because this is pinned by our bishop. White is already completely losing in this position. Of course, white doesn't have to play h3, but it's really hard to defend. A move like g3 is also really terrible, because we can take, and then even here rook takes g3 as checkmate, because of these two rooks working together, and also this bishop pinning. So g3 also doesn't work. Maybe king h1 trying to run away with the king, but then we have h3 ourselves. Then white can play g3, but still this is not looking so good. And we can play a move like f5, and we are trying to open up this bishop. Because for example, if they capture, which is not a good move, you could play knight to e5, knight to d4, and you can already tell this is not so good for white. And yeah, white is in a lot of trouble. They would like to do something, but the knight is pinned. So they have to defend it maybe with the bishop, but we can always capture, take here with check. The king has to move, and then rook takes g3, pawn takes, and pawn h2 is a checkmate as well. So in these variations, almost everything white tries to do, there will be checkmating chances. For example here, of course they don't have to capture us, but again it's really hard to defend. Almost every move loses from white. For example, if they play the rook here, we can capture, they can capture here, and then again knight goes in. I think probably e5 is the best here, trying to play for this, and if white captures, they are again running into a checkmate, and this is a checkmate, bishop takes, and then knight f3 is checkmate. So almost every single line is a checkmate here. Another really nice thing I want to show you is the Siberian Trap. So a Siberian Trap, you can do this against e4 as well. So we are just playing all of our main IDs, all of our main moves, just like we would in the previous position. and the Siberian Trap. So again, we are just playing a6 to stop the knight. And the Siberian Trap is something that happens if white ever plays this move queen to d2. So if white ever plays queen to d2, you can set up a beautiful trap with the move knight g4. And with knight g4, we're kind of threatening here this h2 pawn. But the thing is, there's not really a threat because there's nothing immediate we can do. But still, I would recommend going for this because so many players will not spot your trap and they will play h3. And if they play h3, they are already immediately losing because of this move knight e4. And of course, if they capture your knight, you are capturing the queen. If they capture this knight, they are now checkmated here on h2. And if they think, okay, I realize I can't take this, I can't take this, I'm just gonna move my queen. You can take with the knight with check, and then take with the put the queen here on h2 and have a checkmate. So really devastating. White, of course, doesn't have to play h3. They can also play anything else. Again, try to find a move for white. It's a little bit hard sometimes. And white also has to be careful because if white plays a regular move, for example, a move like bishop d2, again, there is actually knight here to d4. And if black captures this, that's a checkmate. If white pushes the queen back, we can capture here, and that's also a checkmate. So many moves in this variation lead to this checkmate. So h3 is immediately losing, and if they play something else, I'm just going to play a random move again from white. You can just jump in with the knight. So most white moves will lead to a checkmate. I think the most safe option, I'm not really sure, maybe g3 trying to block this diagonal, or they could also try to play with the bishop here, but again, this position is also not really that good for white. So probably g3 is the best, and if they play g3, they can block this. There is no immediate threat here, but we can just continue with a regular plan b5, develop the bishop. And if they try to push h3 later on, you can even take here with the queen because this is pinned. So it's hard to defend this from the white side, but it is defendable. With good play, white can defend this, but still it's a little bit tricky, and that is the whole goal against this e4 variation. If you can set up the Siberian Trap, this is really tricky, and you can find checkmates in many different lines. Then we are now going to take a look at knight f3, and then after knight f3, yeah, and then afterwards also at knight c3. So in these lines, of course, e4 is possible. We took a look at this already. There are many tactics. Then b4 is also possible, but not that good from white because they will lose the pawn either way. Now we're going to take a look at knight f3. So knight f3, we can just recapture. And then I'm going to take a look at, of course, at the variations with pawn to e3, because pawn to e4, which is really often played, will just transpose into all of our previous lines that we have covered. So if they ever play pawn to e4 afterwards, you will just have these nice attacking lines, these nice checkmating lines, and also the Siberian Trap in some variations. So knight f6, bishop d3, knight c6, castles, and of course you can castle in the Benoni, and I think you should castle against most lines. It's just that against this e4 line, you don't need to castle in every variation. Sometimes you can go for this amazing kingside attack and putting your king here in the center. But in some variations, you just castle and just be safe. Knight c3, again, you want to play the queen here, but you don't want to get hit by the knight, so you play a6, then you put the queen here. And all of this is pretty basic. You don't need to know a lot of theory to play this. You can already see it's easy to play from the black side. If you get a move like b4, we're just going to draw back, nothing to worry about. Bishop b2, b5, rook develops, bishop develops. And I'm going a little bit quick because honestly there's nothing too crazy. You just have to always remember the same setup. White will often try to play e4 anyways later on in the game. That's their main plan. And then as black, you can just do normal moves. For example, rook here. And usually there is a lot of pressure on the c-file because the c-file, well, usually there's a backwards pawn here, the c2 pawn, that you can try to attack. And this is always going to be open because our c pawn was traded. So it's always worth playing for some attack down this file. Sometimes you will be able to play knight e4 as well. If this knight is not present, for example, after the knight goes back, you can always try to jump in many variations. Not in this specific variation here. Actually, knight e5 would be better. If they try to defend with the rook, that's possible. And then d5 is a really nice move that I try to keep for later in the game. So you can always play this earlier on as well, but I like to keep this for later on. And once you kind of run out of plans, you run out of developing moves, everything is in position, you can just throw this d5 at them. You can get this exchange. I recommend taking with the pawn, because taking with the knight, it's a little bit iffy. You're helping white to open up all of these lines. If you take with the pawn, at least you have some defense here from the knight blocking this diagonal as well, and also protecting this. Again, trying to find moves for white, and then you can play rook e8. And this is all very logical, very normal developing moves. This is perfectly fine. If you take a look at this from the white side, you will realize white basically has no plan. Because white is already developed, but there's nothing else they can do. The bishops are in a good position. This knight is a little bit dead, honestly. Like, it doesn't have a lot of squares. Maybe they can try remaneuvering it somehow, but that's also a little bit strange. The rooks don't really have a lot of options, so it's hard to play this from the black side. I'm just gonna make a random move for black and as from white, and as black, well, we have some basic plans. We're just gonna keep trying to put threats on this enemy king side. So for example, bishop to d6. If we get this straight, that's fine. We're just trying to put more pressure here. White could always offer up a second trade. You don't have to take it, of course. If you don't want to, you can play knight e5, for example, takes, and you can see we're just going to try and keep opening up diagonals and squares towards the enemy king. With good play, of course, white will be able to defend, and this will be a draw most likely. But white is really on the defensive, and black is always the one trying to create threats, trying to create open diagonals as well for his pieces. And the last variation that I wanted to take a look at is what to do if they just straight up play knight to c3 and then you capture here on c5. And again, most of these variations are very similar. For example, knight to f3 here, knight to f6. And if they play e3, we are actually back in our previous variation where white played knight f3 first. So I'm not going to cover this because it's identical. The only real difference with the knight c3 variation is that white can always go for this. White can always play knight c3, knight f3, and then try and pin your bishop here with their bishop before playing e3. So that's the main difference. They can play e3 first and then put their bishop on b2, or they can wait with the e-pawn move and then play the bishop here and then play e3 later, or maybe even e4, but then we are transposing to some of the other lines we have covered. And if they play bishop g5, that's actually pretty terrible for white because of this move queen b6. So if you ever get this, be happy, you can play queen b6. And this is just a worse version. The best option for white was just to go for e3 and then transpose to the other line. Because here we have queen b6, and you can see we have a double threat. We are attacking this pawn on f2 twice, so we are immediately threatening to capture here, and we're also threatening to capture on b2. So if white just defends, he is losing this pawn here on b2, and also the knight is under attack. So maybe white will take, and then they will have to move the knight somewhere, because the knight is still under attack, and of course defending it doesn't help, because this loses the rook. Attacking our queen doesn't help, because this loses the knight. But the most tricky thing that white can do is play this knight to b5, trying to do a fork here on our king and our rook. But you can easily prevent this. You can, for example, give a check here with b4 first, and you can always prevent this fork by playing knight to a6. But I like to go for the check first because this is really sneaky. After this check, white has to lose castling rights. They basically have to play king e2. Because if they play knight here to d2, you can take, and if they take with the queen, we are capturing the rook for free. So they will have to capture with their king, and then their king is just completely exposed here in the center. And we can just always play knight a6, defend this, and then we're going to play moves to develop the bishop. We can develop the rook, we can put the king here on e7. So everything is fine really in these variations. So that is the main idea. If white goes for knight c3, the main difference will be that in some lines they will be able to pin your knight, which is not really a good variation. If they play e3, we're just going to transpose to the knight f3 lines. And if they play e4, that's also not a problem. Then we have the Siberian Trap and also all of the attacking moves. So that's it for this video. Definitely subscribe if you enjoyed this. And as always, I will see you in the next one.